Alright, so now we're going to talk about the abilities of these Pokemon. So we'll go over Koraidon first, and remember Koraidon's more primal, grounded, wild, represented by feathers, for example. And Miraidon is more technological, kind of meditative, floating, very futuristic, even though there's some reminiscence of the past there. So now we'll look at their abilities. So first we'll look at Koraidon's ability. I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but I will say Oralchum Pulse. So Koraidon's ability is Oralchum Pulse. So it's a new ability being introduced in Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet. The sunlight turns harsh when Koraidon enters a battle. In harsh sunlight, Koraidon's attack is boosted. So first of all, they already have sun abilities or weather in Pokemon. The sun comes out, power-ups, fire moves, water moves do less damage, and moves that require 2 turns or pretty much only solar beam now doesn't have to charge because the sun is out. Okay, so this is a modified version of the move. Groudon also has a modified version, but we'll look at Koraidon's. So this modified version of Sunny Day or Oralchum Pulse is basically the sunlight comes out and his attack gets boosted. Cool. But also another thing too. Actually no, I believe that's all that's covered by this effect. So why the sun? Why the sunlight? Why does Koraidon come out? And it's a legendary Pokemon. It's this reptilian primal creature that's dragon type and very primal. So what does the sun represent to it? Right? The sun powers up its attack. You can just say it's in-game gameplay. Oh, it's a physical attacker, it's attack, but it's still on the theme of it being primal, right? So if we really just look at the sun, what does the sun do? It powers up the planet, it powers up food. It wakes up animals, or circadian rhythm gets going, right? Like for example, here's a dinosaur. A dinosaur is eating other dinosaurs possibly, unless they eat plants, and the ones who eat plants, the plants grow from the sunlight, right? And sorry, I didn't mention this here, but photosynthesis, Oralchum Pulse is actually connected. This ability of Koraidon is connected to the ability photosynthesis, which is all the abilities of all the past Paradox Pokemon, the past ancient Pokemon. So the past ancient Pokemon in this game are actually weird versions of Pokemon that actually exist, but this weird kind of primal like past version of them. And there's only a select bunch of them. So they have the ability photosynthesis, which is basically to boost the Pokemon's best stat in harsh sunlight. Oh, harsh sunlight. Okay, so that pretty much means that I believe it lasts until the Pokemon leaves the field. Harsh sunlight. And in harsh sunlight also, I believe the Pokemon water attacks do 0 damage possibly in harsh sunlight. Yeah. Anyways, back to the theme. So photosynthesis. So these past dinosaur-like or wild Pokemon, their best stat or most proficient stat is boosted in harsh sunlight, other than HP. So this is photosynthesis. So proto means original or primitive. So relating to a precursor. So something before something else, or a prototype. So this is photosynthesis. So apparently it's before even what it sounds like photosynthesis, which is actually an ability already in Pokemon that some grass types have. But this is photosynthesis, okay? So, but we'll look at what it's obviously based on, photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the process by which green plants and certain other organisms transform light energy into chemical energy. During photosynthesis in green plants, light energy is captured and used to convert water, carbon dioxide, and minerals into oxygen and energy-rich organic compounds. Cool. So you can say in a sense the sun is powering up these Pokemon and their bodies. Their life is just getting more powered, right? What does the sun give us? Life on Earth is hard to imagine without our solar provider. Most of all, biomass, including our food, and many more resources are products of sunlight via photosynthesis and other processes. No wonder our health is linked so intimately to the sun as well. The sun gives us light and radiant heat like an eternal and abundant generator. That's very true. We even have, for example, solar power. We're creating electricity out of the sun. You can say probably plant cells are kind of like solar powered cells in a sense, or even our skin to a certain degree where we need some sunlight or a decent good amount to be healthy. So sunlight spans the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which is beyond just the color range, mostly from infrared to ultraviolet wavelengths, and visible light is only a small range thereof. Yep, interesting. So more than just heat. Light with longer wavelengths penetrate under our skin, which is one reason why infrared therapy can be so effective and pleasant. I mean, I'm not a doctor, I'm just taking this. You can believe this or not, but obviously people have been using this or believing this since ancient times, right? Along with this heating effect, sunlight has already been used as heat therapy for pain and injuries in traditional African medicine. So a very primal healing your energy source to life itself is the sun, you know. So sunlight is the best disinfectant. You might have heard that. So it does have disinfectant properties by heat and most importantly UV light, ultraviolet light, and is used in water treatment. In our body, sunlight seems to modulate our immunity on several pathways beyond just vitamin D synthesis. Sunbathing also helps to detoxify the body and skin, both with its actual disinfecting effect and by making us sweat. So yeah, that's very interesting. You can say the sun pretty much is the source of these past Pokemon's power, or their health even, or their livelihood, right? And if you really look at it, you can say that nature is primal technology. It's its own technology, and its source of energy is the sun, this gigantic nuclear mass in the sky radiating all this heat and with such powerful electromagnetic force, right? So the planet pretty much, the technology of these animals, of the body in a way, is dependent on sunlight or interconnected through the dependence of sunlight. So another interesting thing, Aralchum pulse. So in Japanese it's just called Scarlet pulse, but to see that they chose the word Aralchum in English. So I did some research and see what does Aralchum mean. Apparently it's a metal that has been held to be either gold copper alloy, and we know that gold and copper are great conductors of electricity, so you can harness electrical power. And apparently Aralchum also means the color of the sun, because the coins used to be a yellowish or like a brownish tint. So it's either a gold copper alloy, a copper tin, or copper zinc brass, or else a metal or metallic alloy no longer known. In later years, Aralchum was used to describe the sulfide mineral calciferite and also describe brass. And apparently, what did Plato say about Aralchum? Plato wrote about Aralchum in his book Critias. In the book, Plato says Aralchum was in the ground of the legendary island of Atlantis. To the Atlanteans, it was the second most valuable metal after gold. Plato says the Atlanteans put Aralchum in their city walls and temples. So obviously we know the esoteric connection between Atlantis, that city, this great grand city where they apparently had the best technology and were connected to nature. Technology apparently better than today, but apparently it's all fictional. Apparently not, who knows. But it's sunk underwater. So here's an example of an underwater Vishnu statue in near Bali, I believe. So there's a lot of other underwater sunken temples or places, but this is an entire city. So Plato apparently claimed that Oralchum was in the ground of Atlantis, and it was the most valuable metal after gold, and they used it in their city walls and temples, right? So apparently Atlantis, in esoteric knowledge, was sank down because it used forbidden magic or something like that, right? So that's interesting to see that they chose this in the name for Coridon's ability. And also, if we really look at the human body as a kind of like a technology system, or even animal bodies, as these technology systems or vehicles for consciousness, we can look at the whole theme of the primal Pokemon or Coridon and the reptilian brain. Here's a bunch of cool dinosaurs I got here. And here's the primal Pokemon, which look very dinosaur-like or wild, have all these feathers and spikes. See dinosaur tail there. They're very dangerous Pokemon. So the oldest layer of the brain is called the reptilian brain. It is composed of the brainstem, the medulla, the pons, the cerebellum, midbrain, globus pallidus, and olfactory bulbs. Honestly, I don't know what those are, but I would have to research that. The structures that dominate in the brains of snakes and lizards. Okay. So what is the reptilian brain behavior in humans? The reptilian brain, composed of the basal ganglia, striatum, and brainstem, is involved with primitive drives related to thirst, hunger, sexuality, and territoriality, as well as habits and procedural memory, like putting your keys in the same place every day without thinking about it, or riding a bike. So these primitive drives are almost like factory reset mechanics or actions, right? Primitive drives. So that's interesting how even Coridon, like the drive to do something, the word drive, vehicle, motorcycle, I thought that was interesting. So the reptilian brain is involved with primitive drives related to thirst, hunger, sexuality, and territoriality. So basically, survival. You gotta eat, you gotta drink, you gotta reproduce your species, you gotta protect your space in a sense. And interestingly, also has habits and procedural memory. So unconscious behaviors in a sense, they're kind of embedded into our system. So I like this example, putting your keys in the same place without thinking about it. So that means the reptilian brain does not really involve this thinking, right? So yeah, let's looked at a bit of what Coridon's ability means and the primal paradox ancient Pokemon from the past of photosynthesis and their connection to the sun. And now we'll look at Maridon's ability. So Maridon's ability is called Hadron Engine. So if Coridon's ability is called, and this is called Hadron Engine in Japanese as well. If Coridon's ability is called Oralchum Pulse, what is the Hadron Engine, right? The Hadron Engine creates the effect of the move electric terrain on the battlefield. So it's kind of like an artificial weather effect. It's called a field effect. So the sunlight comes out for Coridon, but for Maridon, it creates this electric terrain, this electric field, right? That's just a gameplay aspect. It only lasts for 5 turns. Interesting. So Hadron Engine, an electric field is created, and when this electric field is created, I'm not sure if his stats get boosted, but I'm pretty sure it does. The special attack possibly goes up, but that's okay. We're just looking at this for now. And all the future Paradox Pokemon have the ability Quark Drive, which boosts the Pokemon's most proficient stat on electric terrain, which is similar to how the past Pokemon stats get boosted in sunlight. These future Pokemon stats get boosted in electric terrain, right? So here's an example of just some electromagnetic force, a visual of it. Here's just a robot, kind of like Miraidon, where electricity powers it up. So you can kind of say that just as sun is the power source for living things and their vehicles or their bodies, electricity is the power source for technological things, right? So the future Pokemon, their ability is Quark Drive. So first of all, what is a quark? So quark is one of the most basic forms of matter that make up the heavier elementary particles. Atoms are made up of smaller particles, so protons, neutrons, and electrons. Some are which are made up of even smaller ones. So protons, neutrons, electrons are made up of even smaller things called quarks. So that's interesting how they use very scientific level name, like, like not everyone knows about quarks, but they put that as the ability. And funny too how they call it Quark Drive. So quarks and gluons are the building blocks of protons, which in turn are the building blocks of atomic nuclei. Scientists' current understanding is that quarks and gluons are indivisible. They cannot be broken down into smaller components. So this quark, apparently, that's inside electrons, right? Which is important because the Hadron engine abilities about electricity, it's the whole electric theme for the future for Miraidon, are made of these things called quarks that cannot be broken down any further. So they're pretty much elementary or necessary, apparently. And the interesting thing it says here that these are the building blocks of atomic nuclei. So the nucleus of on an atomic level, right? And they are the only fundamental particles to have something called color charge. Quarks can have a positive or negative electric charge, like protons and neutrons, and gluons have no electric charge. Both quarks and gluons have 3 additional states of charge: positive and negative, and redness, greenness, and blueness. So, to be honest, I gotta research this more. I really don't know how to explain this properly, but I'm just showing you that's what they're using in this game as Miraidon's ability and the future Pokemon. Right? So here's an example of blue, red, and green, I believe, are just these names for these 3 arbitrary things. 3 things that have to be different from how they are defined. Right? Which I think is very interesting. That has these 3 states. So that's a quark. So now we'll look at a hadron. Okay? So, which is the name for Miraidon's ability, the Hadron engine. So Hadron is any member of a class of subatomic particles that are built from quarks and thus react through the agency of the strong force. The hadrons embrace mesons, baryons, example protons, neutrons, sigma particles, and their many resonances. Okay, so that's the resonances. That's interesting because that's talking about frequency. So what is an example of a hadron? There are 2 types of hadrons, baryons and mesons. Baryons are made up of 3 quarks, while mesons are made up of 1 quark and 1 antiquark. Okay. Examples of baryons include protons and neutrons, which are the building blocks of atomic nuclei. So if the building blocks of atomic nuclei, so you can say that if the sun is obviously created of atoms, hydrogen, I forgot what else, but hydrogen and carbon, or I don't know, you gotta look up the facts, I don't want to tell you lies, but for whatever atomic level nuclei it has, apparently it also has these things. So you can see how the sun and electricity are related, even though One is primal, and one is futuristic, but there's ties between two, right? And I don't know if you guys know, but there's actually a Hadron Collider built by CERN, Science Association. So the Large Hadron Collider is the most powerful accelerator in the world. It boosts particles such as protons, which form all the matter we know. Accelerate to a speed close to that of light, they collide with other protons. These collisions produce massive particles such as the Higgs boson or the top quark. So apparently this is a conspiracy that these guys might cause a black hole by accident by colliding these particles so fast. So that's a Hadron Collider, and they actually built one of these. And interestingly, they have a Lord Shiva statue doing the universal dance of ending the universe at CERN. And they even put that on their own website. And we know the significant esoteric significance of this, obviously. So the significance of the Hindu god Nataraja sculpture is said to be that Shiva is shown as the source of all movement within the cosmos, represented by the arch of flames. So they're showing that Shiva, this form of consciousness that embodies the whole universe in a sense. They're using this in their representation for the Hadron Collider, for colliding these subatomic particles. Excuse me. The purpose of the dance is to release man from illusion, of the idea of the self and of the physical world. The cosmic dance was performed in Chittambaram in South India, called the center of the universe by some Hindus. The gestures of the dance represent Shiva's 5 activities. So consciousness's activities: creation, symbolized by the drum; protection, by the fear not hand gesture; destruction, by the fire; embodiment, by the foot planted on the ground; and release, by the foot held aloft. So some esoteric knowledge even in the representation of that itself. And we're seeing that they're creating Higgs bosons, right, using the Hadron Collider. So the Higgs boson is the fundamental particle associated with the Higgs field, a field that gives mass to other fundamental particles such as electrons and quarks. So in reality, they're saying that if electrons and quarks are fundamental to reality, the Higgs field is this field that gives mass, so gives this kind of manifestation or substance, or this variable mass, to these electrons and quarks. A particle's mass determines how much it resists changing its speed or position when it encounters a force. So kind of like a physics interaction based on its variable, you can say. So not all fundamental particles have mass. Interesting too. So here's just something of the matrix and Porygon, like it's the universe as information could be broken down as code, you can say, right? Even if it's natural or technological. There's some debate around that. We'll look into that. So another thing from this future Pokemon is that they kind of look like some sort of UFOs and cyborgs. Like you can see it through Miraidon as well, right? Like Miraidon, like a futuristic cyborg for sure, like an alien almost. And it's very military based, so you could say that too. The military deals with UFOs in a sense. So here's some interesting Pokedex entries of some of the future Pokemon. Here's Iron Moth, which is basically the future form of Volcarona. So this Pokemon resembles an unknown object described in a paranormal magazine as a UFO sent to observe humanity. Okay, that's a pretty funny or weird description. And for Iron Hands, which is a future form of Hariyama, it is very similar to a cyborg covered exclusively by a paranormal magazine. The cyborg was said to be the modified form of a certain athlete. Okay, that's pretty much hinting at humans joining with robots in the future, and that's this kind of weird conspiracy theory pretty much in Pokemon. So Pokemon itself has these little conspiracy theories now that are represented by these paradox Pokemon. And for example, This is this Iron Thorns, a Paradox Tyranitar. So all these Pokemon have the ability where their stat is boosted in electric terrain, right? And interestingly, you can see that the way that its limbs are sometimes not attached to it, but obviously it's connected by some electromagnetic or some wireless connection, right? And here's an example of cyborg or transhumanism, and even in Star Trek where they use these terms such as quarks, even a character called Quark, and a lot of scientific things dealing with aliens, UFOs, military. Example, here's a Borg, which is pretty much a species that does not have its own consciousness in a sense. It's connected to a hive mind that kind of connects everyone's thoughts so you think together. So kind of like these futuristic Pokemon, they're more robotic. They only do what they're programmed to do. It's a hive mind mentality, and it's interesting to see that as opposed to the primal or more primitive uh, ancient Pokemon, the past ones. They're more driven. They're more controlled by their instincts. So you can see how both sets of Pokemon, whether past or future, the past Pokemon, the primal ones are worrying about overriding their violent or survival instinct, and these Pokemon are more in their program state, right? So either way, it's a programmer's instinct. Maybe instincts from the word instructions. So very similar, even though one's the past, one's the future. And this is kind of weird or interesting too. I googled and tried to see, is the human body a biological computer? Is it a computer, right? Some sites say no, some links say no, right? But then if it's not a computer, then how are they trying to put Neuralink? Is it because they can just argue and say, oh yeah, it's because the body gives out electric signals. Just because it gives out electric signals doesn't mean it's a computer or a technological device, right? So let's look at this then. So the human body is biological or primitive, or just primitive nature technology with instincts and survival way of thinking, whereas technology, futuristic technology, is more of this programmed, kind of advanced, kind of fast calculating, right? Hive mind. So how does Neuralink work scientifically? Simply put, Neuralink is a device that uses tiny electrodes to connect the human brain to a computer. These electrodes are inserted into the brain using a surgical procedure that is carried out by a robot. The device is then connected to a computer, allowing for communication between the brain and the machine. Okay. And what will Neuralink be able to do? The idea is that these threads, so whatever thread they connect in your brain to this wireless computer chip thing, will read signals from a paralyzed patient's brain and transmit that data to an iPhone or computer, enabling the patient to control it with just their thoughts. No need to tap or swipe. So far, Neuralink has only done testing on animals. So they are literally connecting the primal technology with future technology, the brain and thinking. So they're saying you're pretty much, the computer knows your thoughts. It knows what you're thinking, right? So, and they're testing it on animals. Like obviously that shouldn't harm those animals, but if the human body is not a biological computer or a vehicle for consciousness, then what does this mean? So is our that's the theme I'm trying to kind of explore through these games. Like, is our consciousness just in these vehicles, just as these other things have vehicles and power and electricity and so on, and programs? And look at here, Elon Musk's Neuralink wants to merge your brain with AI. So even if the computer's attached to our brain, will the computer start telling us what to do and what to think and so on, and insert thoughts into our mind, as opposed to physical, your survival instincts, do they put thoughts into your mind as well, right? So either way, your consciousness, you can say, you know, what is it primal? Is it natural? Is it technological, electrical? Is it all technology? Like, you know? And interestingly, the final, or one of the final bosses of the first part of the game before the DLC is that the professor who's been researching these past or future Pokemon, depending on the game you play, you find out that they have actually died years ago, and they have been replaced by an AI robotic version of themselves. That program goes corrupt, and you have to battle. And interestingly, the professor's research is all based on the terrestrial phenomenon in the game. Terrestrial is basically the Pokemon in the game activate a crystal that can change their type to any type. And the professors also use that terrestrial crystal, that same crystal, to power a time machine to go looking for these paradox Pokemon, right? That apparently they looked at these old research journals, at this conspiracy theory magazine called Occulture in the game, and that intrigued them to find these paradox Pokemon in this place called Area Zero. Even to use the word, it's kind of maybe like Area 51. It's like Area Zero, but we know what zero means esoterically. Zero is like the beginning, you know. Everything derives from the number zero, whether it's primal or technological or computer based in a sense. So that's very interesting too. So here you can look at that's the inside of the time machine with all these crystals in a sense, right? And here's the Scarlet book and the Violet book. So these are the old expedition journals who had these apparent writings or drawings of these weird, strange Pokemon. And it's sort of like a conspiracy theory in the game. Like, are these Pokemon real? Are they not? It's kind of like how today, if there's a UFO or a picture of a Bigfoot, it's like the photo's blurry or barely seen, or it's kind of there in the photo, but do people believe it? And if there's some sketches, like, do you believe the sketches? Like, are these people all imagining these things, or are they real? Or are we looking at something made up so much that we pretend it's real because we imagined it too much, right? And here's just like a mock-up somebody made of the Occulture magazines, right? It's all like dinosaur primal based in the past and more future robot or alien based